A man walks onto the page in Genesis 14, and the Bible refuses to tell you where he came from. He has no father listed, no mother, no birth, no death, no hometown beyond the one he rules. He shows up out of the desert, blesses the most important man in the story, collects a tithe from him, speaks a few lines, and then he is gone. The narrative never circles back. He is not introduced, he is not explained. He simply appears, like someone stepping out of a doorway you did not know was there. His name is Melchizedek, and for most readers, that is exactly the problem. You have heard the name, maybe in a sermon, maybe in a hymn, maybe sandwiched in a list of hard-to-pronounce Bible figures you nodded past. But ask the average person who he actually was, and the answer comes back thin. A king, somewhere. A priest, maybe. Somebody important enough that Abraham bowed to him. What almost nobody notices is the silence around him. And that silence is not sloppy editing. It is the whole point. Genesis is a book that loves genealogy. It is almost obsessive about it. Whole chapters grind through the begats. This man fathered that man who fathered the next. Names stacked on names so that every important figure arrives with a pedigree attached. You always know where people come from. Adam to Seth, to Noah, to Shem, to Abram. The line is traced with care because in this story, your ancestry is your identity. It tells everyone who you are and what you are owed. And then this one man arrives with none of it. No line behind him, no line in front of him. He is the one figure in a book of family trees who has no family tree at all. In a narrative that cannot stop telling you who fathered whom, the silence around Melchizedek is not an oversight you can wave off. It is a deliberate gap, carved into the most genealogy-conscious book in the Bible, and that gap is going to carry an extraordinary amount of weight before we are done. Let me set the scene, because the strangeness only lands if you know what just happened. 4 kings from the east had swept down into the region around the Dead Sea. They crushed a coalition of 5 local kings, looted the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and dragged off captives and plunder. Among the captives was a man named Lot, Abram's nephew, who had settled near Sodom. This was not a small skirmish. The chapter reads like an ancient war report, with real kings and real coalitions and real territory changing hands. The Eastern Alliance had already spent years subduing the cities of the plain, and when those cities finally rebelled, the response was a punishing military campaign that rolled across the whole region, defeating people group after people group before it ever reached Sodom. By the time the dust settled, the invaders were marching home with the wealth of 5 cities and a column of prisoners roped behind them. This was the superpower of its moment, flush with victory, and nobody in their path had been able to stop them. Word reaches Abram, and the quiet herdsman, the man of tents and flocks, does something nobody expects. He arms 318 men from his own household, chases the eastern army through the night, catches them near Damascus, and routs them. He brings back the captives. He brings back the plunder. He brings back Lot. Sit with how unlikely that is. A semi-nomadic shepherd with a few hundred men from his own camp overtakes an army that had just steamrolled an entire region. He does it with a night raid, splitting his forces in the dark and falling on them when they least expect it. There is no natural explanation for the outcome. A man with flocks should not be able to beat the army that beat everyone else. And the story knows it, which is part of why the figure who shows up next, to bless Abram and credit the victory to God, fits the moment so precisely. So picture the return, a dusty, exhausted band of men coming home from a battle they had no business winning. The king of Sodom rides out to meet Abram, eager to collect his rescued people. And then, in the middle of that scene, the text does something abrupt. It interrupts the king of Sodom mid-approach and slides a completely different figure into the frame. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High.
That is the entrance. No build-up, no introduction. He is already a king, already a priest, already on his way out to meet Abram with provisions in hand. Where was he during the war? The Bible does not say. Whose side was he on? It does not say that either. He is simply there, and then he speaks. 2 things about this man should stop you cold, and the first is his title. He is a king and a priest at the same time. In the ancient world, and especially later in Israel, those were 2 separate lanes, and you did not get to drive in both. Kings ruled. Priests mediated between people and God.
Israel would eventually build its whole national life on keeping those roles apart. Kings came from one tribe, priests from another, and when a king later tried to cross that line and burn incense in the temple, Scripture says he walked out with a skin disease for his trouble. The boundary was real, and it was guarded. There was a reason for that wall. Concentrating both the throne and the altar in one set of hands gave a man almost unanswerable power. He could rule the people and claim to speak for God to them at the same time, and there would be no one left to hold him accountable. So Israel deliberately divided the offices. The king could not offer the sacrifice. The priest could not sit on the throne. Each one was a check on the other, and the nation guarded that separation jealously for centuries. A king who reached for the censer was reaching for something that was not his. But here is Melchizedek, generations before any of those rules existed, holding both offices in the same pair of hands. King of a city, priest of the Most High God. No conflict, no scandal, no penalty. He carries an authority that the later system would spend centuries keeping divided. And the story presents it as completely natural, as though in him the two roles were never meant to be at war in the first place. That detail will matter enormously once we get to the one person in whom king and priest finally come together again without any danger at all. And the second thing is even stranger. He worships the true God. He is a Canaanite. He rules a Canaanite city in the middle of Canaanite territory, surrounded by the worship of local gods. And yet the title he carries is Priest of God Most High. And the God he blesses Abram in the name of is described as the Maker of heaven and earth. When Abram answers him, Abram uses the same phrase and ties it directly to the Lord, the covenant God. They are talking about the same God. So somewhere out in the land that Abram's descendants would one day be told to clear of idolatry, there was already a man who knew the real God. Not through Abram, not through the covenant. He was there first, and he knew. The Bible drops that fact and keeps moving. And if you are paying attention, it should raise the hair on your arms a little. It tells you something about how God works that is easy to miss. The covenant with Abram was just getting started. The nation, the law, the temple, all of it was still generations away. And yet here, outside the family God had chosen, in a Canaanite city no less, there was a genuine priest of the Most High already serving. God had a witness for himself in the middle of pagan territory, long before Israel existed to be that witness. The light was never only in one place. It had a foothold in Salem before Abram ever arrived, and Abram, the chosen man, walks up and finds someone already there ahead of him, already on his knees before the same God. Now look at what the man is called, because the names carry the message. The name Melchizedek breaks into two pieces in Hebrew. The first part points to a king. The second part is the word for righteousness. Put them together and you get King of Righteousness. That is not a nickname someone earned. It is built into who he is presented as being. And the city, he is King of Salem. That word Salem is rooted in the same family as shalom, the word for peace, wholeness, the way things are supposed to be when nothing is broken. Most scholars connect this Salem to the early city that would later be called Jerusalem. The same place, different chapter of its life. So line the two up. King of Righteousness, King of Peace. Righteousness and peace, sitting together in one man, generations before a psalmist would write that righteousness and peace had kissed each other. The names are doing theology before anyone explains a word of it.
Then comes the gesture. He brings out bread and wine for an exhausted army, and he speaks a blessing. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, maker of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. Notice who is blessing whom. Abram is the one carrying the promises. Abram is the father of the nation to come. By any reckoning of the story so far, Abram is the central figure. And yet it is Melchizedek who pronounces the blessing. And a blessing always flows downhill, from the greater to the lesser. The bigger man blesses the smaller one. So whoever this priest of Salem is, in this moment he stands above Abram. And Abram seems to know it. Because Abram gives him a tenth of everything, a tithe. The patriarch hands a tenth of the spoils to a king who walked out of the desert an hour ago. You do not do that for an equal. You do that for someone you recognize as higher than yourself.
And what Abram does immediately afterward confirms the read. The king of Sodom offers Abram all the recovered goods. Keep the wealth. Just give me back the people. And Abram refuses. He will not take so much as a sandal strap from the king of Sodom, he says, so that no one can ever claim to have made Abram rich. He takes nothing from the pagan king. But to the priest of Salem, moments earlier, he had freely given a tenth. The contrast is sharp and deliberate. Abram closes his hand to one king and opens it to the other. He honors Melchizedek with the kind of gift you give to someone who outranks you, and he keeps his distance from a king he does not trust. The patriarch is telling you, by what he does with his hands, exactly how he reads this mysterious priest. Then Melchizedek is gone. The king of Sodom resumes his conversation as if the interruption never happened. Genesis closes the door and never opens it again. Quick word before we keep going. If these deep dives into the text are worth your time, the most useful thing you can do is subscribe and leave a comment, even one word. It genuinely helps this channel reach other people who are hungry for this kind of study. And a real word from a real person matters more to the algorithm than you would guess. To everyone who already does it, who comments and shares and keeps showing up, thank you. You are the reason these keep getting made. Now back to the man in the desert, because the silence around him is about to get loud. 1,000 years pass. David is on the throne in Jerusalem now, the very city that was once Salem. And David writes a psalm, the one we number 110, about a coming Messiah, a Lord who will sit at God's right hand. In the middle of it, God makes a vow. You are a priest forever, after the order of Melchizedek. Read that again with fresh eyes. After 1,000 years of silence, after a man who got 3 verses in Genesis and then vanished, God reaches back, picks him up, and uses him to describe the priesthood of the Messiah himself. Not the priesthood of Aaron, not the line of Levi that Israel had been running for centuries. A different order entirely, named after the king who came out of nowhere. And remember who is writing this. David is the king of Israel, the greatest king the nation would ever have. The man the whole royal line is named after. If anyone had reason to anchor the Messiah's identity in the established order, it was David. Instead, he reaches past his own throne and past the entire Levitical priesthood and lands on a Canaanite king who served in Salem a millennium before he was born. David, ruling the very city Melchizedek once ruled, looks back across 1,000 years and says the coming Messiah will be a priest in that man's order. It is a stunning thing to put in a psalm, and the people singing it would have had every reason to wonder what on earth it meant. Why him? Why reach back past the whole established priesthood to a Canaanite king who barely appears? The answer comes in the New Testament, in a letter written to Jewish believers who were wrestling with a real problem. They believed Jesus was the Messiah. But the Messiah was supposed to be a priest, and Jesus came from the tribe of Judah, the royal tribe, the tribe of kings. Priests came from Levi. By the rules of the system, Jesus was disqualified from the priesthood before he started. He had the wrong bloodline. The letter to the Hebrews takes that problem head-on, and it does it through Melchizedek. Here is where we have to slow down and be careful, because this is the verse people misread, and the misreading can take you somewhere the Bible never goes. The writer of Hebrews describes Melchizedek like this: without father or mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. Read that fast and you walk away thinking Melchizedek was an eternal being. No birth, no death, no beginning. Some readers have taken it exactly that far and concluded that Melchizedek must have been Jesus himself, appearing early, before Bethlehem. A preview of the Son of God walking the earth in person. It is an understandable read. It is also, when you look closely, not what the writer is saying, and the passage itself tells you why. To be fair to the other view, it is held by serious, sincere readers, and you can see the logic. The description sounds absolute: no father, no mother, no beginning, no end, a priest forever. Stack that next to the rest of it. He is both king and priest. His very names mean righteousness and peace. He serves bread and wine, and the great patriarch bows and tithes to him. You can understand why some conclude this must have been the Son of God himself, slipping into history early. If you only had those features in front of you, the conclusion almost writes itself. But the description itself gives us the tools to read it more carefully, and when you use them, a different and steadier picture comes into focus. The clues are sitting right there in the words the writer chose. Start with the genealogy point, because that is the key that unlocks the whole thing. The entire argument of Hebrews here runs on bloodlines. To be a priest in Israel, you had to prove your descent. You needed your name in the register, your father a priest, his father a priest, the line traced back to Aaron on paper. No paperwork, no priesthood. There is even a moment in the book of Ezra where men claiming to be priests are barred from serving because their genealogy could not be found. The record was everything. Lose your place in the register and you lost your right to stand at the altar, no matter how sincere you were. Now go back to Genesis and look at how Melchizedek is written. No father named, no mother named, no ancestry given, no birth recorded, no death recorded. As a figure on the page, he has no documented beginning and no documented end. The record is simply silent. That silence is the point. The writer of Hebrews is not claiming Melchizedek was literally never born. He is reading the way the man was presented. On the page, in the record, this priest has no traceable origin and no recorded exit, which makes him the perfect picture of a priesthood that does not depend on bloodline at all. He held the office without inheriting it. He held it without a register to prove it. And the text never tells us he handed it off or died out of it. Look at the words the writer actually chooses. He says Melchizedek was resembling the Son of God, made like him. You do not say a man resembles himself. You say he resembles someone else. The whole comparison only works if Melchizedek and the Son of God are two different figures, one of them a portrait and the other the person the portrait was painted to look like. And the structure of the argument confirms it. The whole point of the chapter is to compare Jesus' priesthood with Melchizedek's, to hold them side by side and show how one illuminates the other. But you cannot compare a person with himself. The moment you say Jesus is a priest in the order of Melchizedek, you have already named two people, the one whose order it is and the one who serves in it. If Melchizedek simply were Jesus, the entire comparison collapses into nonsense. The argument needs them to be distinct, and the writer treats them as distinct from the first sentence to the last. So the honest reading is the careful one. Melchizedek was a real king of a real city, a man who lived and died like every other man. But the way his story was recorded, with all the ordinary details left out, was shaped by God to make him a living preview, a type, a figure designed to point past himself to someone who really would have no beginning and no end.
That keeps us from the cliff. We do not have to turn a Canaanite king into God to feel the weight of what is happening here. We just have to notice that God arranged a man's story, deliberately, leaving the silences exactly where they needed to be. He left out the birth, he left out the death. He left the record blank in all the right places, so that 1,000 years later a psalmist and then an apostle could point at him and say, "There, that shape, that is the shape of the Messiah's priesthood." And the shape is everything, because it solves the problem Jesus' bloodline created. If priesthood depends on descent from Levi, Jesus is out. But Melchizedek proves something the system had buried. There was a priesthood that existed before Levi, before Aaron, before the whole genealogical machine got built. A priesthood that did not run on who your father was. Melchizedek held it, and Abraham, the ancestor of Levi himself, bowed to it and paid it a tithe. In a sense, Levi was still unborn, still in Abraham's body, when Abraham acknowledged a greater priest. The older order outranks the younger one. The writer of Hebrews presses on this hard because it settles an old assumption. The Jewish readers he was writing to took it for granted that the Levitical priesthood was the highest, the final word, the system God had set up and would never replace. But Melchizedek had come first. Centuries before Levi was born, before the law was given, before a single Levitical priest had ever lit a lamp, there stood a priest greater than the patriarch from whom Levi would descend. The blessing flowed from Melchizedek down to Abraham, and the tithe flowed from Abraham up to Melchizedek, and Levi was carried along inside Abraham through the whole exchange. The point is unavoidable. The order everyone assumed was supreme had quietly bowed to an older and greater one long ago,
and the record had been sitting in Genesis the whole time, waiting to be read this way. So when God swears to the Messiah, "You are a priest forever," after the order of Melchizedek, he is reaching past the bloodline rules to an order that never depended on them. Jesus does not qualify as a priest by descent. He qualifies the way Melchizedek did, by direct appointment from God, on the basis of who he is rather than who his ancestors were. And then Hebrews adds the line that turns the picture into something personal. The old priests, the writer says, were many in number because death kept stopping them. One priest would serve, then die, and another would take his place, and another after that. An endless relay of mortal men handing off an office none of them could keep. But Jesus holds his priesthood permanently because he lives forever. Where Melchizedek only resembled a man without end, Jesus actually is one. Think about what that relay of priests was really like. For centuries, the priesthood of Israel was a chain of funerals. A priest would be anointed, would serve at the altar, would carry the names of the people before God year after year. And then he would grow old, and he would die, and the office would pass to the next man. The robes came off one set of shoulders and went on to another. The incense kept burning, but the hands that lit it kept changing, because every hand belonged to a man who was running out of time. There was one day a year that made the whole arrangement visible. On the Day of Atonement, the high priest alone would carry the blood into the most holy place, the one moment when a single man stood closest to the presence of God on behalf of the entire nation. It was the high point of the sacred year. And yet even that man, even on that day, was a dying man doing a temporary job. The same high priest who carried the blood one year would in time be carried to his own grave, and a son or a successor would put on the garments and do it again the next generation. The holiest role in Israel was still handed down a line of mortuaries. The office outlived the men, but the men never outlived their turn. Imagine standing in that system as an ordinary worshiper. The priest who blessed your father is dead. The one who will bless your children is not born yet. The man standing between you and God this year is a temporary figure, a placeholder, faithful maybe, but fading. The whole arrangement is built on people who cannot stay. You bring your sin and your need to a mediator, and even as he lifts your case before God, the clock is running on him too. He is as mortal as you are. He just has the robes. That is the contrast Hebrews is driving at. Melchizedek, in the record, has no funeral. The text never buries him. And Jesus, the one Melchizedek was shaped to picture, has a priesthood that genuinely never passes to anyone else, because the priest never dies again. There is no next man. There is no handoff. The hands that hold your case before God this year are the same hands that will hold it in 50 years and in 500. So here's what this means for the person watching. You have someone representing you before God who is never going to be replaced. That sounds abstract until you sit in the kind of moment that makes you feel utterly alone. The grief that does not lift, the prayer that seems to go nowhere, the long stretch where God feels distant and you wonder if anyone is actually paying attention on the other end. The point of Melchizedek, drawn all the way out to its conclusion, is that the care never lapses. The priesthood standing between you and God is not a rotating shift of mortal men who age out and die. It is one person with an indestructible life who took the job and will never hand it off. He does not get tired of you. He does not retire. He does not die and leave you waiting for whoever comes next. And that changes how you wait. So much of faith is just holding on through a stretch where nothing seems to be happening. You pray and the situation does not move. You ask for help and the help does not come on your schedule. The temptation in those long gaps is to assume the silence means absence, that no one is really there, that you have been forgotten in the shuffle. But the whole weight of this study lands on the opposite. The silence around Melchizedek was never absence, it was design. And the priest he was shaped to picture is not absent in your silence either. He is the same one who was there at the start of your trouble and will be there at the end of it, never swapped out, never asleep on the job, never replaced by someone who does not know your story. When the writer of Hebrews finishes the argument, he lands it right there. This priest is able to save completely, to the very end, because he always lives to intercede. Always. Not in shifts. Not until he is replaced. The man who came out of the desert in Genesis was a shadow of that. The substance is a priest who is still on the page, still mid-sentence, still speaking your blessing, and the door never closes on him the way it closed on Melchizedek. That is why a forgotten king in 3 verses of Genesis turned out to matter so much. He was real. He lived. He ruled a city that would one day be Jerusalem. He worshipped the true God in the middle of a land that did not. And then he died like every other man. But the way his story was told, with the family tree left blank and the grave left unmentioned, was no accident. God set the silences on purpose, so that centuries later we could look at the empty spaces around this man and see, in the shape of what was missing, the outline of a priest who would have no beginning and no end at all. The mystery was never that Melchizedek had no birth. The mystery is that God hid a portrait of his son inside a man's missing paperwork and left it sitting in Genesis for 1,000 years, waiting for someone to notice. If this opened the text up for you, do me a favor and subscribe, drop a comment. Even one word helps more than you would think, and pass it along to someone who would want to see it. Thank you for sitting with this one all the way through. God bless you.